Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. We are going to be continuing our discussion about Dead Like Me. This episode is featuring a Brody. So this is episode 4 of season 2. This episode is called The Shallow End. Now in my last video I talked about how this is my least favorite episode of this season, and watching it again I have to say this is not like my least favorite it's not a bad episode. I think it's really only because of Mason's Reap. Let's just get into this. So the theme of this episode, interestingly enough, is about power plays. And really it's about balance. In the beginning of the episode, George has a monologue about how everybody really wants to know if they're loved. But she asks an even more basic question. Does anyone even like her? And she goes through this mental rehash of coronavirus. Anytime that it shows little George, I think that that might be adult Georgia going back and kind of rehashing things. So we get this mental rehash of this time that her mom took her to a swim day at the community pool, and it did not go very well at all. Turns out Georgia is very unpopular amongst the popular kids. But Georgia realizes that there's always somebody who is just one step lower than you on that social staircase. And that person who was less popular than her was Beth Ann Miller. There's something to be said that's a little disappointing that we never got to see this character as an adult, and maybe as somebody that Georgia gets to take their soul of. I think that would have kind of been some comic justice for Georgia as a character. So I want to kind of bounce around this episode in order of events, because the way that I kind of see this whole thing is how people's power comes in and how those power moves and power balances kind of inform the characters about their world. But we start off by seeing that Joy is trying to get Reggie to go to the mall with her. Joy wants to buy some new clothes. She wants to take Reggie along with her. In this, she's trying to really reel Reggie in. She's trying to get in her good graces and kind of make amends. And Reggie ultimately has the power in this relationship. She has the power to make Joy feel bad about herself. She has the power to make Joy do what she wants for her, because Reggie realizes at the end of the day, she's all her mother has. So if she tells her to get out of her room, Joy's gonna do it because she wants to try to salvage anything she can from this relationship. If Reggie says while they're at the mall, I don't want you to come with me, I want to be able to shop on my own, give me your money, Joy will do it because she wants Reggie to like her. And that's where these power balances kind of come into play, and it plays into what Georgia said at the beginning, is that does anyone even like me? Does anyone like any of us is what we're all struggling with. And in this, we see in the next scene at their Waffle House where Mason is showing Daisy how Tiffany wields her power as a waitress to kind of get people, she unintentionally has power over the patrons at their Waffle House. And we see both of these things playing in, that we want people to like us. And Mason even says that the more somebody thinks you don't like them, the more they want you to like them. And you have power over people when they think you don't like them. And then Daisy makes the realization that Roxy and Rube both withhold affection, that they hold back love because it's easier to do that and they can balance power that way. And Rube has this quip where he's like, how can I withhold that which I do not possess? And that was just a really fantastic moment from Rube, because he's so detached from everything all the time. He constantly has power because he's never worried about if people like him or not. He just does his thing. And that's something we also see re-echoing through the rest of this episode is, do you care if people like you? Georgia asks that to a couple different people. So Millie goes to work, and there is this boy, his name is Ethan, he's working on her computer. He's from information systems, and this is a floor level that we never really hear about. I think they're on floor 5. Millie's kind of mean to him, And this is another one of those reasons that I don't really love this episode, which I'll get into later. But Millie's kind of mean, and she realizes that withholding love, withholding affection is how you get things. And she talks about how the popular kids are never nice, and how it's always the nice kids who get, you know, last place. Ethan is there to help because there was a Nazi problem. Some propagandist in Oregon went and hacked Millie's computer and sent out propaganda to all the computers. So he's there to help with that, but also he and the other boys in his floor all kind of have a crush on Millie, which is interesting because we don't ever hear about this before or after. Millie doesn't tend to explore the building, so how they know about her, why they have a crush on her is all very interesting. And I would have loved to have had more of that fleshed out, but alas, we don't really ever get to hear about this again. So then Mason goes to a swimming pool where he has to collect a soul of this old man. This man is named Theo Heller, and he's kind of obnoxious. The only thing we really know about him is that, you know, he doesn't really like his in-law, his son-in-law, and he doesn't have a wife anymore. And we also know that he has gigantic nuts, like just really huge giant balls that scare people at the pool. And Mason is just very intrigued by them, but not because he's gay, unfortunately, because he just has never seen them that big. And Roxy later comments that some of them are worse. So I don't know what that means, but it makes me uncomfortable. Daisy goes to her Reap, and she is in some type of facility where they do facial reconstruction, possibly body reconstruction. And this is actually a very, very refreshing plot line that we get for Daisy, and we get to see some sweet moments, but we'll get into that. So then back with the last family, we again see this play of power that the sales rep there uses her power to get her customers to buy things, and she kind of sweet talks them and makes them think that they're important so that they'll buy what she wants them to buy. We're seeing this again and again and again throughout the episode. We see Millie taking these power plays way too far. She's being mean to everyone, including Crystal, and she's yelling at people, she's ignoring them, she's not doing her job. And this kind of backfires on her, and people start being mean back to her, and she eventually causes Ethan to just quit. When she destroys the paper crane that he made, he just can't handle the cutthroat corporate type of environment that Happy Time is now, and that's largely due to how Millie treated him. With Mason, when his Reap dies, he refuses to leave, and he's like, no, I want to see my funeral. But Mason can't get him to do what he wants and move on. And this guy Theo just refuses, and eventually Roop has to talk to him. And Mason realizes that he needs to have some power as well. And he talks this guy into going into his light, but Theo has the power over Mason. We see with Stan, who is Daisy's Reap, and I'm gonna refer to them as they because this person wanted to become a female. This is really the only trans character I think that we see in Dead Like Me in their pre-transition, which again is really refreshing for the show, but it's also really refreshing just as a driver for Daisy, because we generally see her pretty cold and aloof to her Reaps. With this one, she starts getting a little bit of a softer side, and we see her, you know, tell Stan that she thinks that they're really beautiful and that they would have made a great woman, and takes Stan to the church so that Stan can pray one last time and talk to God one last time. And we see Stan getting angry that God had all this power and didn't make them a woman, and it didn't matter how many times they prayed, they still looked the way that they did. We see this dynamic kind of shift with Daisy, where she's no longer just this cold, aloof human being. She's starting to show her heart and her soul, and she's opening up a little bit more. Before we wrap up, one of the most important things that I think that came from this episode is actually such a small little piece, was the moment where Joy was shopping for lipstick, and the guy asks her what she wants, and she says she wants the last 10 years of her life back. She ends up buying a new lip color, and this is something we'll see later on, But this is such an important moment because Joy is starting to let go of all of these things that have happened to her and is trying to reconcile with them and become somebody else. And that leads to our wrap up. George has this final monologue where she basically says, some people are becoming who they are. Some people are avoiding who they are. Some people can't decide. But in the end, everybody wants to be liked. And we see those people who are becoming who they are with Joy and Reggie and George and even Daisy to some extent. And we're seeing people who are avoiding who they are. And those people, honestly, are people like Roxy and Rube, who are so much more than the mask that they put on. And then there are those people who can't decide. And it shows Joy, but I don't think that it's accurate that she's the one who can't decide. I think that it's actually people like Mason who can't decide who they want to be. Because Mason has consistently gone back and forth with being passive, being assertive, being an alcoholic, you know, relying on people, not relying on people. He goes back and forth, and I think he is actually the one who can't decide who he wants to be. He's had all this time, but he still can't figure it out. And then we see one of the most fascinating visuals of, I think, the entire season till this point, is it flashes back to the pool, and Georgia is not able to be mean to Beth Ann Miller like the popular girls want her to be. So Beth Ann Miller pushes her into the pool, and Georgia can't really swim, so she just floats there. And I think in that moment, Georgia's considering, maybe if I just die in this pool, it'd be better for me. So she's laying there in the water, face down, she's underwater, and these two gravelings swim up, and they look at her, and one of them goes to grab at her, and the other one stops it by grabbing onto its arm, whispers into its ear. They both look at her, and then they swim away, looking back at Georgia. I wonder if the Gravelings recognize that she is a Reaper and that she is going to be one someday. It's just not her time yet. I wonder if the Graveling hadn't stopped the other one. If Georgia would have become a pet Reaper if she had died in the water. But I do wonder, too, if much like how the Reapers all get together and they get their assignments and their notes on who they have to collect, do the Gravelings also get something similar, where they know who they need to go get and essentially make things happen so that they die, kill them. And in that moment, was it two Gravelings who were going to get their target, and it was like in season 1 with Ronnie, the schizophrenic, when there was the clerical error. Did they maybe tag George to be killed in that moment? But it was a clerical error. She wasn't supposed to die for another 8 years. And that was kind of a big oops. But she would have become a pet Reaper, maybe. But it's interesting because Georgia looks at them and she doesn't seem to be fazed by them, but she seems to acknowledge their existence. So I wonder if George has always been able to see Gravelings. And she says in the very final episode of this season that she's always been painted with something darker. So I do wonder, did George actually see those two Gravelings and just actively ignore them? Or did she not see them? So as I've said a couple times, the reason why I don't particularly love this episode is because I think Theo is kind of an obnoxious character, and I really think that moment where he takes off his towel and walks through those group of girls, I think it's so crude and disgusting in a way that this show normally doesn't bother me in, but for some reason that really did, and I didn't like that. And I don't like how mean Millie is to Ethan, because we've seen Georgia and Millie becoming this nicer, softer person, and then suddenly we see her take this nosedive out of nowhere and be mean to this poor kid who didn't deserve it. And I think just overall, there's moments of this episode that are really strong and really great and really good for character development. I think the overall underlying message is really strong. I think these elements of Millie and Theo really just kind of drag the episode down, which is why I don't like it as much as the other episodes. But my favorite quotes, there's two of them, and they're both from Dolores. First is when she says, "But Andy in personnel has carpal tunnel in both hands. He can't even pee by himself." And 2, "Oh, Millie, this is nothing. You should have seen the tattoos I've had removed." She also has another one that I didn't write it down, But there's another one that is MVP where she is talking about how back in the day when I had all those restraining orders on me, I thought that violence was the only answer. And there's all these moments that we get of Dolores that make her seem like she was some type of badass back in the day, and she realized that that was not the path she wanted to go on. She became somebody else and became just positive all the time. And I think these moments that we get to see of Dolores kind of being naughty and hearing about her kind of naughty side is what's really fascinating about Dolores' character. And I will stand by that she is the most well-written, most interesting character that's ever been on television. Period. Thank you for watching. I know hopefully this isn't as long as what I filmed, but thank you for watching, and I will see you guys in the next episode.